There is a curious thing about the human heart. It longs to be admired long before it has learned to be governed. We wish to be approved of, applauded, and assured that we matter. And so we become collectors of opinions, measuring our worth by the changing expressions on other people's faces. But discipline performs a strange and almost uncomfortable work within a person. It teaches him to rise without applause, to continue without encouragement, and to stand even when no one is watching. The disciplined man discovers that much of what he once called confidence was merely a hunger for permission from others. For the one who has learned to govern himself no longer needs the world to constantly agree with him. He has found something quieter and far more durable than approval, the ability to be at peace with his own conscience and steadfast in his own convictions. There are many chains by which a man may be bound, and not all of them are made of iron. Some are invisible, delicate as spider silk, and yet they hold him more firmly than prison bars. One of these chains is the desire to be approved of by other people. Most of us imagine ourselves to be independent creatures. We like to think that our decisions are our own, and that our opinions arise from some secret chamber within us. Yet if we examine ourselves honestly, we may discover that a surprising number of our actions are performed for an audience. We dress not merely to cover ourselves but to be admired. We speak not merely to express truth but to receive agreement. We pursue certain ambitions because they appear impressive in the eyes of others. There is nothing wrong with enjoying encouragement or appreciating kind words. Human beings are social creatures, and affection from others is one of life's pleasant gifts. The trouble begins when approval ceases to be a gift and becomes a necessity. A man who cannot endure disapproval is not free. He may appear strong, but he has handed the keys of his peace to everyone around him. Such a person lives in a curious sort of slavery. He enters a room and immediately begins measuring himself by the reactions of others. A smile gives him confidence. A cold glance robs him of it. Praise lifts his spirits, and criticism casts him into despair. His sense of worth rises and falls like a ship tossed upon the sea, because it depends entirely upon winds he cannot control. This desire for approval often disguises itself as virtue. We call it being considerate or wanting to be liked. Yet beneath these respectable names there sometimes hides a quiet fear, the fear of being rejected, overlooked, or thought insignificant. Many people spend years constructing a version of themselves that they hope others will accept, and in doing so they gradually lose sight of who they truly are. There is something exhausting about living in this condition. Imagine a man carrying a mirror everywhere he goes, constantly lifting it to see how he appears in the eyes of others. He would never have a moment's rest. In much the same way, the person addicted to approval is forever examining himself through the opinions of those around him. He cannot simply live. He must continually ask whether his life is being applauded. The tragedy is that the approval of men is among the most unstable possessions in the world. Crowds are notoriously changeable. The same people who praise a person today may criticize him tomorrow. Fashion alters, opinions shift, and public affection moves from one object to another with remarkable speed. To build one's identity upon such a foundation is to build a house upon sand. Moreover, the appetite for approval behaves much like every other appetite. Once indulged, it rarely becomes satisfied, it grows. A little praise soon seems insufficient, and a person begins to crave more admiration, more recognition, and more assurance that he is valued. What began as a small desire gradually becomes a master demanding constant service. Many of our anxieties spring from this hidden addiction. We fear failure because failure may diminish us in the eyes of others. We hesitate to speak honestly because honesty may cost us approval. We remain in situations that injure us because leaving them might invite criticism. We become strangers to courage because courage often requires the willingness to be misunderstood. A person who depends entirely upon approval has placed his happiness in a dangerous position, for he has made it dependent upon forces outside himself. He waits for others to tell him that he is worthy, important, or successful, and because no human applause can permanently satisfy the soul, he remains restless, forever seeking another compliment, another sign of acceptance, another voice to reassure him that he matters. There is a peculiar habit in human nature that allows us to admire discipline from a distance while avoiding the very thing from which it is born. We speak warmly of determination, perseverance, and self-control, yet we often wish to possess these qualities without paying their price. We desire the fruit while shrinking from the labor of planting the tree. The beginning of discipline is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself with trumpets or arrive in a moment of great inspiration. More often it enters quietly, at the exact point where excuses begin to lose their authority. Every person carries within himself an astonishing ability to explain why he has not done what he ought to have done. He can blame his circumstances, his upbringing, his mood, or the inconvenient behavior of others. The mind is exceedingly clever at manufacturing reasons that make our failures appear reasonable. Excuses are attractive because they preserve our comfort. They allow us to believe that our condition is the fault of something beyond our control. If we are undisciplined, we may blame a lack of motivation. If we are unsuccessful, we may blame a lack of opportunity. If we fail to improve ourselves, we may insist that the proper moment has not yet arrived. In this way, a person may spend years waiting for perfect conditions that never appear. The strange thing about excuses is that they often contain a measure of truth. Circumstances can indeed be difficult. Some burdens are heavier than others, and certain obstacles are undeniably real. Yet discipline begins when a person stops asking whether his reasons are understandable and starts asking whether they are useful. A perfectly reasonable excuse still leaves the task undone. There is a profound difference between explanation and surrender. To explain a difficulty is one thing, to allow that difficulty to govern one's life is another. Many people confuse the two. They become historians of their own limitations, endlessly recounting the causes of their present condition, while making little effort to change it. They know precisely why they are standing still, but have forgotten how to move forward. Discipline requires a kind of honesty that is often uncomfortable. It demands that a man admit that many of the walls he blames are, in fact, doors he has refused to open. It asks him to recognize that he is capable of more effort than he usually gives and more courage than he usually displays. Such discoveries are seldom pleasant because they remove the comforting illusion that someone else is responsible for our lives. Excuses also possess a curious ability to multiply. A single act of avoidance often creates another. We postpone a task today and then excuse tomorrow's delay by pointing to yesterday's failure. Little by little, habits of avoidance become part of our character. The person who repeatedly chooses excuses eventually begins to think of himself as someone incapable of discipline, when in reality he has merely practiced surrender for a very long time. The disciplined person is not necessarily the one who feels the greatest enthusiasm. More often he is the one who has ceased negotiating with every passing emotion. He understands that weariness, uncertainty, and inconvenience are common companions in life. If every duty depended upon the presence of motivation, very little would ever be accomplished. There comes a moment in every meaningful endeavor when a person stands before two paths. One path offers explanations, comforts, and reasons to delay. The other offers effort, responsibility, and action. The difference between an undisciplined life and a disciplined one is often found in that quiet moment of choice. For discipline does not begin when life becomes easier, when circumstances improve, or when every obstacle disappears. It begins when a person grows tired of the endless conversation with his excuses and decides that what ought to be done will be done, even in the presence of inconvenience, uncertainty, and reluctance. There is a common misunderstanding that freedom means the ability to do whatever one pleases whenever one pleases. Many people imagine the truly free person to be the one who obeys every impulse, follows every desire, and refuses every form of restraint. Yet a brief examination of human life suggests something quite different. The man who cannot refuse himself anything is often the least free of all. Consider the person who cannot resist anger. He imagines that he is expressing himself honestly, yet his temper governs him more than he governs it. Consider the person who cannot turn away from distraction, pleasure, or laziness. He may boast that he is living according to his own wishes, but he is, in reality, obeying every appetite that knocks upon the door of his mind. A servant who changes masters every hour is still a servant. The curious thing about self-control is that it appears restrictive from a distance and liberating from within. To the undisciplined person, rules seem like chains. The effort to rise early, to keep promises, to remain faithful to one's duties, or to resist unnecessary pleasures appears burdensome. Yet those who practice such disciplines often discover a freedom unknown to those who reject them. The musician who patiently trains his hands gains the freedom to create beautiful music. The writer who disciplines his thoughts gains the freedom to express profound ideas. The athlete who governs his habits gains the freedom of strength and endurance. In each case, self-control appears first as limitation and later reveals itself as power. Human nature has a strange tendency to rebel against restraint, while quietly suffering from the consequences of having none. We wish to avoid difficult habits because they seem demanding, yet we frequently become prisoners of our easier choices. The person who cannot control his spending becomes a servant to debt. The person who cannot control his tongue becomes a captive of broken relationships. The person who cannot control his desires often discovers that his desires eventually control him. There is an old illusion that every appetite deserves immediate satisfaction. Modern life often encourages this belief. We are taught to seek comfort quickly, to avoid inconvenience, and to satisfy our wants without delay. But every unchecked desire asks for more than it first appears to demand. A small indulgence becomes a habit, and a habit gradually assumes the authority of a master. The disciplined person begins to experience a different kind of freedom. Because he can deny himself certain pleasures, he is no longer entirely dependent upon them. Because he can endure discomfort, he does not fear it as greatly as others do. Because he has learned to govern his impulses, he is less easily manipulated by circumstances. This inner freedom is one of the rarest possessions in the world. Many people are outwardly free and yet inwardly imprisoned. They may go wherever they wish, say whatever they please, and pursue countless opportunities, yet they remain slaves to fear, laziness, resentment, or endless craving. Their chains are invisible, but they are chains nonetheless. The disciplined individual discovers something remarkable. Every act of self-control strengthens the ability to choose wisely rather than merely react. He becomes less dependent upon moods and less vulnerable to passing emotions. He no longer waits to feel inspired before doing what ought to be done. He acts because he has learned that the governance of oneself is more reliable than the governance of feelings. There is a profound dignity in a person who has gained authority over his own nature. Such a person cannot be easily bribed by comfort or frightened by difficulty. He possesses a stability that does not depend entirely upon circumstances. His peace is not the result of having every desire satisfied, but of knowing that his desires do not possess absolute authority over him. For the person who learns to command himself begins to walk through life with a certain quiet independence, carrying within him a freedom that no changing mood, no temporary discomfort, and no passing temptation can easily take away. There is something deeply appealing about praise. A kind word can brighten an ordinary day, and the approval of others often gives us a sense of warmth and belonging. No sensible person would deny that encouragement has its place in human life. Yet there is a danger in mistaking praise for strength and admiration for progress. Many people live as though the opinions of others were the chief measure of their worth, and in doing so they become dependent upon something remarkably unstable. Praise is a curious thing because it is often loud while genuine growth is usually quiet. The world tends to notice dramatic moments, the great achievement, the public success, the visible victory. What it rarely sees are the countless ordinary acts that made those moments possible. It does not applaud the early mornings, the repeated efforts, the hidden struggles, and the long seasons of faithful work. Consistency, however, is built precisely from those unseen things. It is the decision to continue when enthusiasm has faded, to keep one's commitments when convenience suggests otherwise, and to remain faithful to a worthwhile task even when no one is paying attention. Such a life rarely appears impressive in the beginning, because its strength lies not in sudden brilliance, but in steady endurance. Human nature is strangely attracted to what is immediate. We enjoy quick results and visible recognition because they offer a sense of reward. A compliment can be received in a moment, while character is formed slowly. Praise arrives quickly and disappears quickly. Consistency often demands years before its effects become apparent. This explains why so many promising efforts are abandoned. A person begins a noble pursuit with great enthusiasm and perhaps receives admiration for making the attempt. Yet when the praise fades and the work becomes ordinary, his determination weakens. He discovers that he was not laboring for the value of the task itself, but for the pleasant feelings produced by the attention surrounding it. There is a profound difference between being admired and being dependable. A person may impress others with occasional bursts of effort and still possess very little discipline. Another person may receive almost no recognition and yet quietly build a life of remarkable strength through steady habits. The first shines briefly like a spark, the second burns like a lamp that endures through the night. Consistency possesses a certain humility because it does not require an audience. It is content to repeat the right action even when no applause follows. The disciplined person understands that most meaningful achievements are not the result of extraordinary moments but of ordinary actions performed faithfully over long periods of time. A tree does not become strong in a single day. It grows slowly, sending its roots deeper into the earth season after season. In much the same way, character is formed by repeated choices that seem insignificant when viewed individually. Reading a few pages, practicing a skill, keeping a promise, speaking truthfully, exercising patience, each act appears small, and yet together they shape an entire life. Praise can be a pleasant companion, but it is a poor foundation. If a person relies upon applause to continue his work, he will often stop whenever the applause ceases. The crowd is inconsistent by nature. It celebrates one thing today and another tomorrow. To build one's efforts upon public approval is to construct a house upon shifting sand. Consistency creates something far more valuable than admiration. It creates trust. We trust the person who remains faithful to his duties, who keeps his word, and whose actions do not change with every passing emotion. Such individuals possess a quiet strength because they have learned to value perseverance more than recognition. There is also a certain freedom in becoming less dependent upon praise. A person who values consistency above applause no longer needs to be continually noticed in order to continue his work. He is not discouraged by silence nor intoxicated by compliments. He understands that the worth of an action is not determined by how many people applaud it, but by whether it is good and necessary to be done. Few experiences are more uncomfortable to human beings than standing alone. From our earliest years we learn to seek companionship, approval, and acceptance. We wish to belong to a circle, to be welcomed by others, and to feel that our thoughts and actions are shared by those around us. There is nothing unnatural in this desire. Man was not made to live entirely isolated from his fellow creatures. Yet there are moments in every meaningful life when a person must choose between the comfort of company and the demands of conviction. Many people imagine that loneliness is the absence of other people. More often it is the experience of holding to something that others do not understand. A person may stand in a crowded room and still feel alone if his principles separate him from the opinions surrounding him. It is in such moments that character reveals itself. There exists a subtle pressure in society that urges us toward conformity. We often adopt the views of those around us, not because we have carefully examined them, but because agreement feels safer than disagreement. To think differently can be costly. It may invite criticism, misunderstanding, or even ridicule. Therefore, many people quietly surrender their convictions in exchange for acceptance. The desire to belong is so strong that a person may continue walking down a road he knows to be wrong simply because others are traveling the same path. There is a peculiar comfort in numbers. If many people approve of an action, we often feel relieved of the responsibility to question it. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that crowds can be mistaken, and sometimes terribly so. Discipline gives a person the strength to endure moments of solitude. The disciplined individual gradually learns that not every worthwhile decision will be met with applause. There are occasions when doing what is right means disappointing others, refusing popular opinions, or stepping away from familiar company. Such choices are rarely pleasant, but they are often necessary. To walk alone does not necessarily mean becoming proud, stubborn, or indifferent to the thoughts of others. There is a difference between independence and arrogance. The arrogant person refuses all advice because he believes himself superior. The disciplined person listens carefully, but retains the ability to stand firm when his conscience requires it. Many of the most important decisions in life are made in quiet places where no crowd can accompany us. No one can exercise self-control on our behalf. No one can make our difficult choices for us. No one can carry the burden of our responsibilities. There comes a point when every person must stand before his own conscience and decide what kind of life he intends to live. The fear of standing alone often keeps people from becoming who they ought to become. They remain silent when they should speak, hesitate when they should act, and compromise when they should remain steadfast. They fear being thought strange, and so they become copies of those around them. In seeking acceptance, they gradually lose their individuality. There is a curious strength that emerges when a person becomes willing to endure solitude. He discovers that he can survive disapproval. He learns that rejection, though unpleasant, is not fatal. He begins to understand that peace of conscience is often worth more than popularity. The opinions of others lose some of their power, because he no longer treats acceptance as the highest good. This does not mean that the disciplined person never experiences loneliness. On the contrary, he may feel it deeply. Courage is not the absence of discomfort, but the willingness to act rightly despite it. There are seasons in life when the path of growth seems unusually quiet, and when one's convictions create a certain distance between oneself and others. Yet it is often in these lonely moments that a person becomes most truly himself. Freed from the constant need to imitate, impress, or please, he begins to act from conviction rather than from fear. He learns to stand with integrity even when agreement is scarce and companionship uncertain. Carrying within himself the quiet knowledge that a person who can walk alone, when necessary, is no longer entirely governed by the opinions of the crowd. Few things possess greater power over human beings than the opinions of other people. A careless remark can trouble us for days, and a word of criticism can remain in the memory long after it was spoken. Many lives are quietly governed by this invisible authority. People alter their choices, silence their convictions, and abandon their ambitions simply because they fear what others might think of them. There is, of course, nothing wrong with listening to wise counsel. Every sensible person benefits from correction and learns much from the experience of others. The difficulty begins when we surrender our inner stability to every passing opinion. A person who is constantly disturbed by the judgments of others soon discovers that he possesses very little peace, for the world is never short of opinions. The remarkable thing about human judgment is its inconsistency. The same action that earns praise from one person may invite criticism from another. A decision admired today may be condemned tomorrow. Public opinion is like the weather. It changes with surprising speed and often without much reason. To build one's confidence upon such uncertain ground is to choose a life of continual anxiety. Many people spend years attempting to avoid criticism altogether. They wish to be universally liked, universally approved of, and universally understood. Yet such a desire asks for something impossible. No person who has ever lived has escaped misunderstanding or disapproval. The attempt to satisfy every expectation eventually leaves a person exhausted, for the expectations themselves are endless. Discipline teaches a different lesson. It teaches a person to examine criticism carefully without becoming enslaved to it. Not every opinion deserves equal authority. Some judgments are wise and deserve thoughtful consideration. Others arise from misunderstanding, jealousy, or simple disagreement. The disciplined person gradually learns the difference. There is a kind of inner steadiness that develops when a person repeatedly chooses principle over popularity. Each time he acts according to what he believes to be right, despite the possibility of criticism, he strengthens a quiet independence within himself. He becomes less like a leaf carried by every gust of opinion, and more like a tree whose roots have grown deep into the ground. Many of our fears concerning the opinions of others are greatly exaggerated. We imagine that every mistake will be remembered, every failure discussed, and every weakness carefully observed. Yet most people are occupied with their own concerns and anxieties. They are thinking far less about us than we imagine. The prison created by the fear of judgment is often built from assumptions rather than realities. Even when criticism is real and painful, it need not destroy our peace. The disciplined individual understands that his worth cannot depend entirely upon the changing evaluations of others. If his entire identity rests upon approval, then every insult becomes a threat and every disagreement becomes a personal wound. But when his sense of value is rooted more deeply, criticism loses much of its power. To become unshaken by the opinions of others does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means learning to receive both praise and criticism, without allowing either to completely govern one's sense of self. Praise can become intoxicating just as criticism can become discouraging. The person who depends entirely upon applause will eventually be devastated by disapproval. There is a certain freedom in reaching the point where one can endure misunderstanding without immediate panic. A person begins to speak more honestly, act more courageously, and pursue worthwhile goals with greater determination. He no longer wastes so much energy trying to manage every impression or secure the approval of every observer. Such stability is not gained in a single moment. It grows slowly through repeated acts of discipline, through choosing integrity over image, conviction over comfort, and truth over popularity. Little by little, a person discovers that the voices around him need not dictate the condition of his soul, and that peace becomes possible when he ceases handing his inner life to the changing judgments of the crowd, and learns instead to stand firmly upon convictions that do not rise and fall with every opinion that passes by.